All right, it's Prime Suspects, it's Christmas Eve, and it's a holiday bye week for Joe, but you, the audience, are on our nice list, so today we bring you the gift of Adam. And Adam, Christmas week can mean a change of pace for a lot of us, so what's it like on your end as both a bettor and a bookmaker?
It doesn't stop for us. Sports has become a 365, 366 in a leap year kind of thing. I remember first getting into this business and there was not allowed to be any betting on Good Friday and I think even Christmas Day back then. But now you've got these leagues purposely putting sporting events on these big public holidays and whatnot to get the television, the rights, everybody looking at. This year, obviously, we have some big Netflix game after the Tyson Paul kind of shit show that it ended up being for the viewers. This time I will be on the side of the viewer and seeing it through the TV. So I hope it works better. I hope it's clean. And it'll be interesting to see if there is any issues with it, how the live betting goes. Again, for, a much bigger event than one boxing.
Yeah, I think we're all going to have our fingers crossed that this one can be broadcast much more seamlessly than the boxing match. And as we all gear up for that NFL doubleheader tomorrow, we're going to experiment through the course of this episode with our first mailbag show. Adam, you made an Ask Me Anything type of post on Twitter, and at Sports Bets Guy asked you just about everything in response, seeking out your opinions on sweepstakes, crypto, gambling Twitter, player profiling, player acquisition, and your favorite gambling content. So first off, thank you, Sports Betting Guy. We'll give you an unofficial producer credit for this episode. And taking these one at a time, sweepstakes seems like quite the timely topic, with a recent spike in swirl around certain operators slow paying, banning winners, and suspending their affiliate programs. Now, on one hand, something like banning winners sounds quite similar to the regulated market. And on the other hand, a lack of player protection in seemingly any form of regulation sounds similar to the offshore market. So, Adam, all that considered, how would you describe your thoughts on the current state of the sweepstakes betting landscape?
Well, it's actually been really interesting. I mean, were we not heavily in the regulated market, sweepstakes might be something that we should be taking a lot closer look at. I think it's generally casino product. So I know, they've sort of tapped into the sports. Different legal opinions and thoughts that I've heard along the way is the states that don't have the iGaming won't go after them too hard, but obviously we have, I think it's 36 states or something with sports betting. So obviously there's a DraftKings, there's a FanDuel, there's all this presence of these other groups in there that really don't want them in there doing sports bet under this nature. I think one of the funny things is, as you said, it's a gray market in the backyard of the US. I mean, they've been fighting this offshore thing for 30 years and suddenly it's in their backyard and the operators are kind of just laughing at them because there's nothing that they can really do based on the structures of the laws and things like that. The player protection thing, I mean, that's sort of the whole conversation and the whole purpose that the regulators talk about in regulating this. And this is what we've sort of said in multiple of our podcasts, saying the whole point of regulating the unregulated or bringing the offshore home is to give players that protection to know that they can use their credit cards, they can use whichever way to deposit, and they're guaranteed to get payout. I've been in this business long enough to be on the wrong end of non-payments and things like that. So the whole reason why you go down the regulated path, and that is for really player protection. Yes, there's the taxes. Yes, there's other things, aspects to it. But the whole point of what a player really wants is be able to deposit their money or with sweepstakes, make a purchase and then go through that entertainment process and then know that whatever happens, if there is money or a prize for them to collect, that it's there on the other end. It's been really interesting watching this. We've seen multiple exchanges come out of the regulated market and go into the sweepstakes. So it's kind of interesting to see this way it plays out. Granted, I think it's a great idea in a sense of the ones that did move to it. Listen, it's a cash grab, make some money now, build a database, and then obviously, you're just getting cease and desist letters. So then you turn it off and now you have some money in the bank and a nice database to be able to, be acquired by a regulated operator or turn back into that one where the exchanges went from regulated to non-regulated. Does that mean they'll be able to come back to regulated, or is that going to be seen as being a Bovada or something? You were in the unregulated space and then you're going to try and get licensed? No, we don't want you. So there's sort of some interesting aspects to where this ends up going.
And over the course of you sharing those insights, I think I caught a couple of references to the gray market, and that might be a very natural parallel to our next topic. Adam, how would you describe your point of view on all things crypto right now?
There's a lot of people with some cash in, or some value in their pockets burning, I guess, or in their wallets. Converting that to fiat isn't the easiest thing to do. Plus, there's obviously costs surrounding it, but it's gambling. I mean, yes, I'm involved. I've been in it for some time. I've had some good results. I've been in it, got in high, it's gone low. It's just another form of gambling. I've not been heavily invested in stocks in my life. One, accessibility's not always been there, especially in the US stock market. But even back home in Australia, I played, when I was younger, 18, early 20s, but I needed to be liquid for sports betting and everything that I did in this space. So it wasn't something that I've really ventured into. So for the most part, has really been the ease of transferring funds from one place to another place. And ultimately that's, paying people across countries, oceans, everything like that is ultimately why most of them get into it. I don't know enough about the blockchain per se and the future of what that's going to do. Obviously been in lots of different conferences, different rooms where that is explained of what the future of that is. But generally for most, I think it's just trying to buy low, sell high, and get involved in that nature. But for us, and this is definitely something from a prime aspect, is, there is states talking about accepting this now. We've just had Amazon and Microsoft looking to add it to their balance sheets. So with the knowledge that we have BetCris in Latin America. So they have, used it. We have it integrated into our systems there. So if a New Jersey or Ohio or someone like that says, yes, crypto is now an option as a deposit withdrawal method, we'll be first in line with our hand up saying, how can we help? How can we educate? And how can we make this part of the way of getting some of that unregulated betting into the regulated market? Because the unregulated market right now is heavily reliant on crypto deposits and withdrawals to ultimately be able to move that money around.
And crypto can be a bit of a polarizing topic on gambling Twitter. So using that as a bridge to our next topic, thinking of the ecosystem on a more holistic basis, if you will. Adam, how would you describe from your perspective the best and worst aspects of gambling Twitter?
So I think a lot of people just take it way too serious. I mean, those that get to, I've done this, I've gambled from the age of, I can actually date it to around 10, 11 years old. I think it's probably a few years earlier than that. And then I was in the Australian regulated market. I was with an operator. So I've been doing this, legally for 30 years from where I'm from and where I exist on the planet and in operations. I mean, if you've gotten the pleasure of making money, gambling, sports betting, horse racing, casinos as an advantage player and things like that, like I think they get a little too serious in getting into the weeds with some of these people of what's right, what's wrong, what's different opinions and stuff like that. For me, I've seen it as a privilege to be able to just literally wake up every morning, see what games are on today. If I don't get the final score at night, I wake up and get it the next morning. And it's just a 24/7. You can, from tennis to golf to NFL to Australian sports to European sports to horse racing to, yeah, I think a lot of them just take it way too serious. There's obviously a lot of big egos there. And one thing I've heard over the last few years, it's more about, instead of wanting to be the biggest building by tearing down the next biggest building, just build the biggest building. Like if everyone just concentrated on what they're doing, what they're trying to grow, the impact that they're trying to do within themselves, not worry about others and what they're all trying to get you sort of riled up about, it'd be a lot peacer, calmer sort of world. But the other aspect of it is there's good information. There is some good back and forth. There is some good opinions. There is some genuine people in there that are trying to help other people. You share information, help out if someone's not getting paid or slow paid. Regulator aspect in a sense of you have a bad outcome with an operator. There's people there that have access to regulators that can sort of speak to them and try and advance things. So everything that we do these days, and particularly social media and gambling, Twitter there's a lot of garbage, but there's also a lot of good in there. And it's really, for each of us to sort of be more self-aware of when to dive into the nitty-gritty, dirty stuff of it, or when to sort of be the bigger person, step back and not even sort of engage or reply. And I think there's a lot of people that just are now reading the threads rather than getting engaged. Some people, it's their nature just to get engaged and, try to get those likes and those retweets and things like that. So each their own, but I think it has its positives, it has its negatives, of course, but that's across the world.
To your point about the good that exists on the platform, if we want to shine a bit more light on that for a moment here, I may be putting you on the spot, but if we want to play a bit of a Mount Rushmore game, if you will, Adam, if you could only follow 4 people on gambling Twitter, who would they be and why?
I don't really take that much notice of who I'm following, and I've sort of tried to, anyone that follows me, I'll follow back. So I think my, kind of evens out in that sense. Off the top of my head now, I've got good relationships with Rufus. I think he's someone that tries to bring, well, yeah, I think every time he puts something on there, he's trying to do it for the betterment and the good of it. But he's an easy target. Can't remember what school he went to, but it was a Yale or something like that, if I'm correct. He's a very fucking smart guy. And maybe he's a little, socially, and I can't think what the word is, but awkward per se. But he's generally trying to give good feedback to people or good information and things like that. I know he kind of got hammered earlier in the year when he bet the no on Bryson DeChambeau in the major that he won. But there's a lot of aspects and other underlying pieces to that probably bet the no on 25 golfers. So it all sort of evens out. Yes, he took a serious hit on it, but that's just the way that, certain people bet and know the math and that behind it. You do that over the course of the year and he's a long way in front because he knows what he's doing. I don't know if there's any couple that you throw out and I can I don't mind giving negative or whatnot on different ones. Spanky's another one that's, trying to give good stuff. Richard Schultz is one that, is, again, genuine stuff, brings some industry items plus other, little tidbits here from back in the day. Obviously, myself and Roxy go way back, and whenever we catch up, have great conversations. But there's a lot of underlying, I guess, smaller guys that I like to take notice of as well. I think, is there a -110 or is there a one guy I know that I've sort of spoken to occasionally, whatnot? So there's little bits of that, but I'm not really a heavy follower of key people. I know who the Mount Rushmore of gamblers are. So I'm sort of watching those people as much as anything. And then there's sort of the ones that sort of get into the weeds a bit more and sort of give information. Alex Kane, per se, is another one. I know what he's trying to do in the industry, while I don't believe in it, is just another piece of the puzzle to give players an out. And that's ultimately what our goal is as operators. Well, our goal should be, I should say, because there's not that many of us, is to have it where a person can deposit their money, can play, see visible, transparent limits, can withdraw if they win, and then the cycle goes round. And I think that's where you get into the same aspect of, there's people on Twitter that I know lose money betting, or at least lose money betting in places that I've worked in and I have access to. But you would think that they're the greatest gambler on earth. Now, maybe they are at the other 100 sports books that they have, but I think I can get a pretty good gauge of where a person really lives in the ecosystem overall collectively, because the best of the best usually beat the books that I'm at. Or if they're losing bettors at the books that I'm at, is because they're trying to manipulate the market and things like that.
Well, it's like you're reading my mind because, I put you on the spot there. I think you gave a very well-rounded answer, and you touched on at the end there getting a gauge on just how good some of these bettors really are. So this next segment, not going to put you on the spot in any way because we've addressed it on previous episodes. When it comes to player profiling and acquisition, for those who have missed what you shared previously or could use a refresher, first off, how would you give maybe a bit of an elevator pitch on your approach to profiling and acquisition?
Yeah, for me, again, it's getting them in the front door, letting them bet. I know there's conversations of, CLV. I get it. I understand it. Those that were following me at the Jamaican racetrack a few weeks ago, I was backing things at 30 and 40 to 1 that closed at 5 to 2. I mean, there's really no bigger CLVs than that. And I didn't win a single bet for the day. Other aspects, I think, depending on where you bet, if you have a 3 to 4% CLV at times, often it's the last bet or it's the last move. If it's on, soccer, tennis, some of those things. If you have that on NFL, all the betterment to you because that's a strong and efficient market. Hedges, timer bets, things like that it's collectively looking at that information. And how many bets can you tell someone's genuine? Well, us that have struggled to get bets on, we're playing games all the time as well. Opening up an account in a cousin's name and then bet parlays for the first 3 months. And sometimes it ends up like 6 months now. I've got my son who's playing And it's like, here's some money, just go play how you're going to play. I'm not going to influence. I'm going to teach you a few things in that, but go play. And then ideally, if he's lost a bit over the course of a few months, then it's an account that we can play around with and things like that. So having lived on both sides of the world, and when I say that, both sides of the counter, you really understand what the players are trying to do that are genuinely winners and messing around with trying to strike your profiling team off a little bit. But it's just get the bets in, see where the movements are. It's obviously easier in pre-game than live, but a lot of that stuff's moving to live now. So it's really just, I think the biggest problem with the profiling is there's so many dolphins getting caught in the tuna nets that, that's kind of why we think we're in such a good position with Prime of being able to pick up players that should never get limited. So yeah, if we can profile players out less than 0.5% that are truly winning, but identifying what are the arbors so we can let them go to work, who are the originators so we know that's a real bet and where to move it to, and then sort of, everything around that, bonus whores, which shut them down as quick as you can. If they're only coming in for that purpose and they're trying to bet a smaller sport, get the line to move enough so they can bet the other side, cost them that percentage, but get their bonus rollover. There's a lot to it. So it's sort of the challenge of the games that are played today. But ultimately, you're just trying to find that handful of probably originators that, one, tells you where the market's going, and two, the arbitrages, because ultimately you're looking at their stuff, and if they're beating you in some spots, then you want to be able to know how they're beating you and why, and look at that market that they're arbing you with. And then others that are just, losing, then great, you're just beating the market.
And to put a slightly new spin on that overarching approach, you touched on live betting, surging. I'm wondering if there might be anything to this when it comes to more experience you've gotten under your belt with Prime. How, if at all, would you say your approach to profiling and player acquisition has changed this year?
So the player acquisition I thought was going to be a lot easier. I thought we'd come to America and we'd just educate people. That's not how it works. Big limits. Again, if you're genuinely a bad bettor, big limits aren't going to entice you because you're getting bonuses and decent limits at these other places. The DraftKings and the FanDuels and the MGMs, the Caesars, etc. When they have you and they know that you're a good long-term investment, they're going to keep you and they're going to keep you and they're going to get it to a point where their ROI is very small in the beginning, but they've learned how to keep these players from the brick and mortar days, the casino days and things like that. And they're just going to kind of prime you into just you going back, feeling comfortable, getting what you're getting, and just slowly eke out and earn from you. The rest of it is, again, trying to work out, yes, we know the first 500 bettors that coming in are assassins. But where we've definitely seen an advantage is New Jersey with Sport Trade there and, a dozen plus other books. The arbitrages are helping us. They're keeping our head above water. We're seeing exactly where they're betting, who they're betting against at times. And we're realizing that, that's a niche market that we're quite happy to take those players where I'm sure they've been limited and are multi-accounting at many other places. So it's a complete re-education is kind of where we're at. And we've sort of done it the last few weeks at Prime we've understood our sign on and our KYC was an issue. We're getting different feedbacks on the UI. We are not a recreational book. So if you're looking for the shiny SGPs and that these, I was on FanDuel yesterday and they had like 10,000 people that had bet this one SGP that sits on the front of their page for $10 or $15 and things like that. That's just not the player we're chasing right now because we believe that DraftKings, FanDuels aren't our competitors. It's the unregulated market. It's your golf course bookie, it's your bar bookie, it's stuff like that. And then ultimately, we want to get those bookies that want to lay off something, betting into it, the ecosystem as well. So it's really been a complete re-education of what we thought we could do and now what we're going to have to do. And the conversation sort of the last 7 to 14 days, and especially in the last sort of 48 hours is, okay, we're going to reset. We're going to go into 2025. We may not go the 108. We may go back to minus 110 and bring some kind of loyalty program, which seems that most of the bettors don't understand the value of 108. There's also the aspect that will make 108 sort of something that's, not difficult to reach, but for certain players, once we get them under our belt and profile them a little bit and things like that, even if they're seen as pros or masters in that, that still might be some value for us to push that rather than the loyalty. But the American players right now, they've been kind of ruined, in my opinion. They've been given so many bonuses just repetitively. The ones that get into the iCasino and the iGaming versus the sports. And now the market with, they had that hearing last week and this Safe Bet Act and stuff like that. They're really not understanding what sports betting is as a whole, and it's just going to make it more difficult, which is then going to make the unregulated market just so much easier to compete with what they have on offer.
All right, and last but not least for sports betting, guys, flurry of questions. Then we'll get to a couple more to round out this episode. Adam, what would you say is your favorite gambling content to consume?
So I'm not a big consumer. I generally lack the time to sort of get into it too much. There's a site called sportinglife.com that I've followed for 20 years, and then different touts and whatnot have gone from there to other places like the Betfair Tip Center and stuff like that. Another guy I have on boxing, Graham Houston, who puts out an email called Fight Rider. I'm wanting information. I'm wanting context. I'm not wanting the answer. And generally it's whether it's, not even statistics. I mean, I'm not a big data guy. I'm more about looking at something, feel of it, things like that. Now, granted, you give me a guy that has really good data and sort of has picks and that based on that data, I can take their data and turn it into a betting product for both the bookie and the bettor, in a sense of really understanding, where the number needs to be to lay the bets and then where the edges are in the inefficient market to take that and bet it. And that's where Sporting Life for me is just, they write, long write-ups, their golf week in, week out, just gives you a lot of information where often when you get to the bottom and look at their 4 or 5 tips, there's sort of information on 2 or 3 other guys that they've passed on for betting purposes, but I see them as, very good value versus something else that I've looked at or something else in the market. When it comes to, I've been on the Bostonian versus the book sort of, I think the last 14 weeks or whatnot. And I found myself occasionally sort of turning them on the days that I'm not there on a Thursday, just again, because I know they're looking at it from a knowledge perspective. Dave's been behind the counter. They know what they're looking at versus ones that are just kind of trying to tout stuff or talk about, certain aspects. And then they're more concentrating on what their pick is rather than the information of the game. So that's generally, I'm looking for things that just has a huge amount of information and maybe has something at the bottom of what they surmise it as. So you can sort of look at it and go, yeah, that makes sense. So, I can look around what the prices are and stuff on that. But generally it's more of looking for the tidbits. I was looking at one yesterday about the tennis majors for this year, and there was a tip for Wimbledon and there was a tip for the French Open. And there was some other comments that they made in there that when I went and looked at the markets, there was another player that was completely, a lot higher in 1 or 2 places than what they were sort of the way they were talking about it. So I'm old school, I guess. It's like reading the race form. I'm sort of more reading summaries and previews rather than watching any kind of videos on it. Occasionally I've sort of found some YouTube channels and that as well. There was a golf one, can't think what it is off the top of my head, that I would sort of get into every now and again. But I'm very inconsistent with a lot of the YouTube stuff and that. When it comes to sort of what I consume in those aspects, it's more about general life stuff and trying to, be a better person and sort of look at the world a little bit different. Because the one thing that sports betting's definitely done is it teaches you a lot of stuff. It teaches you the patience, as does horse breeding. It teaches you to look at value on certain things, to zig when others are zagging kind of thing. Kind of like going back to the crypto one, when it sort of starts sailing off and everybody's talking about it. I think it was 2017 or something like that when everyone was buying in. I think it was around Christmas time again. And then January, it just tanked. Like, it's the same with sports betting. And that's why with Scott on a Saturday night, like, we're really looking at where the general public is betting and then go on the opposite direction and using that as a sort of our play of the week. And it's worked out somewhat this season. So I don't get to do as much of that side of it as I'd like to, as now I'm sort of gambling on companies and CEOs and different things like that. But ultimately, teaching the kids to cross the road is gambling. So it's just, for me, everything sort of comes back to assessing the situation. What are the odds? And if I can watch something that sort of gives me information to be able to do that better myself, then that's sort of the content that I'm leaning into.
Teaching the kids to cross the road is gambling. I'm reminded of a line that stuck with me in the book Thinking in Bets by former pro poker player Annie Duke. Everything is a bet. And Adam, by the way, I don't want to go too much further without saying that describing your picks as somewhat successful on the Saturday show with Scott would be really selling yourself short. That has been nothing short of remarkable. So want to be sure to give credit there where it's due. And also note a connection I picked up on as you shared that answer. It seems like you've been vocal about your surprise as to an apparent lack of an appetite for education from most American bettors. It seems like you yourself have quite the hearty appetite for education. And just maybe that would explain why most bettors get the results that they do. And you, on both sides of the counter, have put yourself in the position that you're in. So continuing to put your wealth of knowledge to use, I will move on from sports betting guys questions to one we got from Jacob at JacobT0000. He notes that Vegas horse pools inspired him about this topic. Another shout out to our mutual friend Scott. And Jacob's question is that in terms of the NFL and other sports, why do the books usually get 2/3 of their most preferred outcomes every week? He suggested some factors such as line origination and an influx of public money tipping the lines to create value on the other side for sharps. Adam, I'm going to pivot from what he shared to what you think on this, wondering how accurate you think it is that books get 2/3 of their most preferred outcomes every week, and what you would deem to be the true leading causes of this effect if it's valid.
I've said it before, there's people that you can give the final score and they still can't find the winner. It's just a natural phenomenon, I think. And you have people generally betting favorites. Now, it's just a natural thing to look at a game and go, there's only one team that can win this. And that's why they have point spreads to try and make it a 50-50 event. And the NFL, for example, is probably the most efficient numbers around, and they have been for a very long time. If you're very successful at betting NFL week in, week out, and I'm not talking props and these underlying things that are easier to pick off, getting a little bit of information or know the style of the games and the teams and stuff like that, then you're a legit bettor, because NFL is one of the most legitimate lines, efficient lines. And you'll find that there's a lot of people that, they stick to second halves, and now they're transitioning to live because there is weaknesses in the live models in NFL. But when it comes to the NFL in particular, it's just a tough sport to beat. And majority of the money from the street is pushing it in one direction. And it's just a natural phenomenon that it seems like over the course of the time, the public will lose. And that's why generally when the public win, whether it's a 10-team parlay or something like that, you want to pay them as quickly as possible to retain them and keep them and sort of getting back to that retention aspect. Because if you treat everyone as equals and you take the money quick, so why not give it back to them quick when they actually back a winner? But that's just something that's been there for a very long time. And there's other countries and other sports you could get into in the UK, the English Premier League and things like that are the top level sports, plus you have 2 teams to win at a draw. So you've got a 3-way market, and generally people will bet the favorite, and the favorite might draw. It's not necessarily a bad result for the favorite, but that's just sort of the way it works out. If the books had to put all these numbers up at 50-50 and not have that house edge, then it might be a little bit of a different story of how they book and how they manage this and things like that. But I think if they still did that and offered even money both sides, 99.5% of their players, if you have, true liquidity, a good foundation, are still going to lose at that 50-50. You don't need to take the house edge. But that's, the name of the game, as they say. They need that house edge to be able to survive, pay the bills, things like that. Yeah, NFL's one that I wouldn't take too much notice of in a sense of how the results fall. It's just the one sport that seems to swing very late in the game, is alive very late in the game, no matter what the spread is. And there's enough upsets that sort of make that happen. But last week, for example, all the late games went to the public. The morning game, there was a few. Monday night games went to the public. There's probably, what is it now, an 18-week season? There's 3 or 4 of them that the bookies get destroyed every season. And you just kind of hope that it's the right weeks. When it's at the beginning, it hurts, but then the players have the money and they come back harder. If it's late in the season, then they sort of peter out, but you've sort of gotten what you needed to in the beginning and things like that. So it's a balance, and it's all back and forth. You've got to have a long-term vision in this game, whether you're a bettor or a bookie. Those cycles and those swings come. It's just part of the game.
All right, well, Adam, we've got one final question for you, and it might be your favorite one. It comes in from an anonymous viewer. Let's just call him Joe in Virginia. What's the best apple pie you've had in the last year, and why is it Ludenberry Farms?
I mean, that was spectacular. Where did I end up? I was coming out of New Jersey. I believe I was going over to Indianapolis for VCon. I actually met the CEO of the Major League Rugby at SBC, I think it was in New Jersey. And so I started to look at their product and led me to going and watching a game that was in Virginia. There's a team down there. I can't think what they are at the top of my head. I do have a jersey of theirs here somewhere because rugby is a sport I grew up on. I love drive. My favorite thing about the US are the roads and the road trips. Like you can drive for 2 days in Australia and see nobody. The roads here, just, you can drive for 2 days. You can see all kinds of things. You can get from completely different places. And I saw this place drive into the rugby game. And on the way back, I was just hoping that it was going to be open. And I stopped and I did something that I've generally never done before with filming what I'm doing. And, it was kind of the beginning that's been inspired by, Gary Vee and VCon and stuff like that of just putting yourself out there and doing things. And I mean, it was just a fucking spectacular apple pie. And I grew up with apple pies and an apple tree in our backyard from zero. So yeah, it's put me on a path where I did some Michigan apple ciders this summer. And, my wife makes some spectacular jelly donuts and things like that, which took me back to my days in Geelong at cold football games back in Australia when I was probably 10 or 11. But yeah, thanks, Joe from Virginia. It was, one hell of an apple pie, and I look forward to having another one day.
And to the audience, as you're hopefully looking forward to some apple pie of your own, along with other food and drink and quality time with loved ones as part of your holiday season, thanks for making us a part of your week. Have a safe and Merry Christmas, and we'll catch you next week right back here on Prime Suspects. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at Prime Sportsbook, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.